What happens when the golden girl of country music walks into the lion's den, only to find herself trapped in the most hostile interview of her decade-long career? Today we're pulling back the curtain on an explosive confrontation that left Carrie Underwood rattled, the View panel utterly divided, and millions of fans across the globe forced to choose a side. This is the story of how a typical morning show appearance spiraled into a career-defining moment, one that absolutely nobody saw coming. Before we jump into the precise moment the bridge began to burn, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments below. Do you think talk show hosts should get to grill guests, or are they meant to be playing it safe? It was just another typical morning at the legendary View Studios situated in New York City. Carrie Underwood was scheduled for a routine promotional visit, basically a layup interview. She was there to promote her brand new album along with her upcoming tour. Her publicists and producers were ecstatic. Carrie is the ultimate gold standard for mainstream popularity and will bring a massive rating boost to a highly competitive time slot. The interview started off with Whoopi Goldberg's typical high-octane energy. However, if you looked closely at the panelists' expressions, there was a tension already brewing under the surface. Joy Behar, whose cutting and unapologetic commentary has become a hallmark of The View, appeared noticeably anxious. Sarah Haynes and Alyssa Farah Griffin held their customary positions, while Sunny Hostin fiddled with her papers, her eyes revealing what seemed like a hidden agenda. Although their pre-interview chit-chat consisted of standard light talk holiday plans and irrelevant celebrity gossip, veteran View viewers could feel the static. Joy was overly engrossed in her notes, and Whoopi's voice had an unusual sharpness whenever she made any mention of their scheduled guest. So, were they merely doing a standard interview, or were they planning an ambush? As the camera flashed back on after a commercial break, Whoopi seemed unusually warm in her introduction. Our next guest is a country music powerhouse with several Grammy Awards and a massive fan base worldwide. Let's give a warm welcome to Carrie Underwood. The studio audience went wild. Carrie gracefully walked out wearing her signature winning smile and effortlessly waved to her fans with the familiar poise of an experienced performer. She took her seat, radiating the classic Oklahoma sunshine that has propelled her to superstardom and chart success for almost 2 decades. "Thank you so much for having me today," Carrie said warmly. "It's always a joy to be here in New York City." Joy Behar leaned forward. Though her smile was pleasant, there was a calculative glint in her eye, signaling that the jovial pleasantries would only be brief. "Carrie, we are so thrilled to have you," Joy started. "Your latest album is receiving rave reviews." Carrie, comfortable in her environment, reciprocated the sentiment with a warm smile. "That means the world to me," she replied. "This record truly means so much, and I really wanted the songwriting to reflect who I am at this moment in my life." For the first few minutes, the interview was exactly what anyone would expect: perfection. Sunny Hostin nodded along as Carrie discussed the inspiration behind her latest chart-topping title track. Sarah Haynes shifted the conversation to the relatable subject of how a major star juggles the demands of her massive career with raising a family. Carrie navigated the questions with practiced grace, laughing off the difficulty as a constant juggling act while praising her husband and children for their steadfast support. The audience was glued to the conversation and erupted with laughter at her lighthearted stories about life on tour and her children's amusing responses to her level of fame. It was slick, professional, and exactly what her publicist had booked. However, as the interview progressed, this typical exchange was about to be rocked with the force of a freight train. The smiles were about to fade, and the real questions were just around the corner. However, then, the tide turned. Joy Behar's gaze, the one seasoned viewers know like the back of their hand, the slow, almost imperceptible narrowing of the eyes, settled on Carrie. This was the look that signaled the end of friendly chit-chat and the start of a legendary smackdown. "Carrie," Joy began, her tone casual, but the politeness had been subtly edged out by an undercurrent of ice. "Your music has always really connected with a certain demographic. Country fans, especially in certain parts of the heartland. What are your thoughts on having a massive amount of influence over such a large group of people?" The air seemed to get thin in the studio. Carrie was not expecting the promotional album interview type question. She looked over at Joy, and one could just see her gears turning as the underlying intent behind the carefully worded question finally sunk in. This was not just a passing query, it was a pointed interrogation. "Well," Carrie replied slowly and with painstaking care, "I believe truly that music should bring people together. I sing about the experiences we all have: love, heartbreak, faith, family." Joy nodded, but she wasn't buying it. Her response was a lightning bolt that split the studio sky in two. However, don't you feel that there is something beyond that? Your fan base seems heavily rooted in red states and in the heartland, where a particular political leaning holds significant popularity. The studio audience was dead silent, and one could tell the wheels in Whoopi Goldberg's head were whirring as she shot Joy an exasperated look, a look that said, "Don't push it." You could see the panel shifting nervously. Carrie still held her million-dollar smile, but her shoulders stiffened perceptibly. "I don't tend to think about politics when I'm creating music," Carrie said with perfect, well-rehearsed poise. "I strive to provide my listeners with music that appeals to the core of their beings, and that it doesn't matter what their backgrounds or beliefs might be." Joy was not letting up, though. Leaning back and meeting Carrie's eyes unflinchingly, she went for the kill shot. "But you have to realize that your position holds power. When you have filled stadiums, sold millions of albums, and can garner millions of followers on social media, then fans will and look to you for their views. They'll want to know where you stand on the hot topics of the day." Could Carrie maintain her cool, or would she finally crack under the immense pressure? Carrie drew in a slow, deep breath. "I prefer to keep my private life out of my work. People come to my concerts to escape, not to hear all of the unpleasantries of the world. I never want to make anyone feel like they don't belong simply because they may have different views than I do." It was a beautifully composed and diplomatic answer. Anywhere else, this would have been the end of the interview. But Joy Behar was just warming up, and what followed next would catapult this into the stratosphere of talk show infamy. Joy's eyes lit up with a predatory glint. With a theatrical slowness, she shuffled her cards again, prolonging the pregnant, almost painful pause for a few excruciating seconds. "See, this is what I find really interesting, Carrie," Joy said, her voice now cutting through the room like a razor. "Because to remain neutral and to stay out of it, in a way, is taking a side, especially when you are making millions of dollars and people who will be voting against their own interests are your primary fan base." In the entire span of her 20-year career, the veneer of professionalism around Carrie Underwood hadn't just slipped. It had sputtered. "Excuse me?" Carrie whispered, the last vestiges of warmth evaporating from her tone, replaced by sheer incredulity. The Golden Girl had entered the lion's den, and there was no visible exit. "I'm not really sure I follow you," Carrie said, lowering her tone by an octave. Joy leaned in, enjoying every second, sure she had the superstar in a corner. "What I'm getting at is that your music, your whole image, it's all wrapped up in this nice, clean, family values soundbite. Church-going, God-fearing, traditional. But when the real issues come to light, the issues that affect your fans' healthcare, their jobs, their rights, you all go mysteriously silent." The rest of the panelists shifted uncomfortably. Whoopi Goldberg made an attempt to throw out a life raft. "Joy, maybe we should—" But Joy was in her zone, unstoppable. "No, Whoopi. I think this is important. Carrie has built a career on connecting with working-class Americans. They trust her. They look up to her. And those same Americans are being fed garbage and misinformation about elections, about vaccines, about climate change, and she just stays in her lane and collects a paycheck." The room was practically electric. You could see Carrie being pushed to the brink, but, again, refused to break. "Joy," Carrie stated, her voice measured, "I think you're making some unfair assumptions about me and my fans. I am not a political commentator. I'm an entertainer." "An entertainer," Joy said, her voice laced with contempt. "That is booked at shows with Confederate flags in the parking lot. That's an entertainer who performs at shows that are essentially Trump rallies with better background music." The audience gasped. Sarah Haynes looked horrified. Even Sunny Hostin wore a look of genuine concern on her face. This wasn't a debate anymore. It was a character assassination on live TV. If Joy was looking for Carrie Underwood to crumble, she had made a mistake. "Now that's not fair, Joy." Carrie countered, the steel finally visible in her eyes. "Joy, I have fans from all walks of life, from every side of the aisle. I've performed for troops in the military, for disaster relief organizations, for causes and charities all over the spectrum. To even suggest that I have any inclination toward endorsing or inciting extremist behavior is just not accurate, and it's insulting." Joy showed no hesitation. "Is it insulting, though? Because when you are choosing to remain silent, when you are offering implicit comfort to those who want to dismantle democratic elections, to those who want to deny women control over their own bodies, how is that not a statement? It's respectful." Carrie's Oklahoma drawl thickened as the emotion began to pour out. "My silence is respect to the fact that I know my fans are intelligent enough to hear the misinformation, to form their own opinions without a country singer telling them how to vote." Joy let out an unpleasant, cold laugh. "Intelligent enough to figure it out on their own? The intelligent enough to figure out that vaccines contain microchips and that the election was stolen? Finally, Whoopi managed to cut in again. Joy, I think we need to... Whoopi... Carrie cut her off. Let her finish. I want to hear precisely what Joy has to say about the millions of people who listen to my music. Silence fell over the studio. The two women's eyes met. What I think, Carrie, Joy stated, her tone matter-of-fact, is that you've made a business decision. You have a brand to protect, and that brand is built on not having opinions. The truth is, if you came out and said, the election was fair, or vaccines save lives, or climate change is real, you would lose money. So you stay silent and you let them believe whatever kind of crazy conspiracy theory gives them the comfort that they need. Only the hum of the cameras filled the space. Carrie Underwood was no longer a guest. She was the defendant in an interrogation. How does a superstar come back from that kind of attack? The answer was coming next, and it was going to change everything. Carrie and Joy stared each other down, Carrie's silence saying more than words ever could. When Carrie finally spoke, there was no trace of the saccharine American Idol contestant left. Instead, there was the cold, contained fury of a woman about to snap. You want to know what I really think, Joy? Carrie's voice sliced through the tense air. I think you are sitting here in this New York studio making huge generalizations about people you've never even met. I think you are basically calling millions of Americans stupid conspiracy theorists simply because they don't share your zip code, and frankly, because they don't share your political party. I think you've decided that everyone who goes to church, or everyone who lives in the middle of the country, or everyone who holds traditional values is an extremist and is in fact dangerous. Joy tried to interject, but Carrie wasn't backing down. You are talking about my responsibility to use my platform, Carrie continued, her intensity building. And what about your responsibility? You are using your platform right now to attack me and every single fan that likes my music. You are the one dividing America. You are the one creating animosity. You are the one insulting people's intelligence because of the playlist that they like. The studio was in a hushed silence. The polished, media-trained superstar wasn't being the superstar. She was a woman whose identity was being challenged and she was fired up. But there was one thing the world knew. Joy Behar was not going to be backed down. I'm not attacking you, Carrie. Joy's voice sharpened as she regrouped. I am asking questions about where the role of a celebrity comes into play in a democracy and asking what their obligation is when this misinformation is dividing the country and, in fact, causing people to die from it, to actually speak up against the lies. And who gets to decide what the misinformation is? Carrie shot back immediately. You? Do I? Do the experts do it? Because I've had enough experience now to know what is labeled misinformation one day becomes the truth the next day. And I've had enough experience now to know that maybe the regular people, the people you are assuming are too stupid to know the truth, might have a lot better instincts than the so-called experts you look to for answers. Sunny Hostin attempted to be a peacemaker, chiming in. I think what Joy is saying is, with great power comes great responsibility. Carrie turned her head slightly, her gaze meeting Sunny's, a hint of softness entering her expression. I'm very conscious of my responsibility, Sunny. But my responsibility is to my art, my family, and my fans with love. And it is not to become a political pundit because I can sing a good tune. Your silence sends a message, Joy yelled over the rising cacophony, and people interpret what you say nothing about to be a message. They interpret it how they want to interpret it, Carrie responded coolly, just like you've interpreted the fact that I'm not going to be your personal mouthpiece as me agreeing with everything you hate about me. The air in the studio was thick enough to cut with a knife. The rest of the panelists looked ready to leap off their chairs, and the audience sat silently, completely in awe of witnessing what had to be the biggest interview in the show's history. Joy collected herself, leaning forward, ready to land her final knockout punch. Her voice had that tone of moral righteousness that she's earned the respect and criticism of millions for. Well, fine, Carrie, Joy said after a calculated beat of silence. Let's just get specific then. Let's talk about what your silence has actually cost people. The knockout was coming, but was Carrie ready for the hit? Your silence is killing people, Carrie. Joy leaned forward, her voice sinking into a low, deadly, earnest pitch. When you've got an audience of millions of people and you decide to stay silent while your fans are being fed lies and misinformation as fact, people will die. They'll die of preventable diseases because they refuse to be vaccinated. They'll die in acts of political violence because they've been told the election was stolen. Your precious neutrality has a body count. The words hung in the air of the studio, a palpable physical weight. Sarah Haynes let out a choked gasp, and even Whoopi Goldberg was momentarily speechless. It was as though the room itself had stopped breathing. But if Joy expected Carrie Underwood to melt under the weight of such an accusation, she seriously underestimated the woman sitting across from her. Carrie remained absolutely still, her gaze fixed on Joy's. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, but it possessed an intensity far greater than any shout. "How dare you?" The question was measured, deliberate, and icy. "How dare you sit there and accuse me of having blood on my hands simply because I refuse to be your political mouthpiece? You do not know me, Joy. You do not know my heart. You do not know my beliefs, and you certainly don't know the conversations I have with my family, with my friends, and with my fans." Joy attempted to interrupt, but Carrie raised a hand, halting the rest of the table. "No," Carrie continued, her voice firm. "You wanted to make it personal, so I'll get personal. You talk about responsibility. Let's talk about the responsibility of a television host who uses her platform to demonize nearly half the country. Let's talk about the responsibility of someone who believes she has the right to judge the character of millions of people she's never met, based solely on their musical tastes." The atmosphere in the room instantly shifted. Carrie was no longer reacting. She was taking the offensive, launching a counterattack that caught Joy completely off guard. "You talk about misinformation, Joy," Carrie went on, "but what about the misinformation you're spewing right now? What about the lie that anyone who doesn't agree with you politically is somehow inherently dangerous and or unintelligent? What about the lie that a celebrity's opinion holds more weight than an individual's conscience?" Joy's face grew flushed, her carefully constructed facade of professional composure beginning to fray. "I never said people were stupid, Carrie. I said they were being misled." "By whom?" Carrie shot back immediately. "By their pastors, their neighbors, their own lived experiences, or by anyone who doesn't consume the exact same information sources that you do? Because that's what this is all about, isn't it? It's not about responsibility, it's about control." Sunny Hostin once again attempted to intervene, her voice carefully measured. "I don't think anyone is trying to control anyone here, Carrie." Carrie's gaze shifted to Sunny, her expression intense but not necessarily hostile. "Aren't they, Sunny? Because what I'm hearing is that I have an obligation to use my platform to promote certain political beliefs, and if I don't, I'm somehow responsible for every tragedy I see reported. That sounds an awful lot like control to me." Joy leaned back into the fray, a sneer playing on her lips. "What you call control, I call civic duty. When you have influence, you have a responsibility to use it to do good. And who determines what's good, Joy?" Carrie's voice rose, slicing through the growing din. "Is it you? The media? The politicians in Washington? Because I've got news for you, Joy. The people who listen to my music aren't some mindless rabble just waiting for a celebrity to tell them what to think. They are teachers. They are nurses. They are farmers. They are small business owners." The standoff had escalated to a fever pitch. Was this the moment the Golden Girl walked, or was she just warming up? Stick around. Carrie's next words silenced the entire panel. These are military families. These are single mothers. These are grandmothers that are trying to survive in a world that changes every single day. The studio audience was silent, completely spellbound by what was happening in front of them. This was no longer a political debate. This was a spiritual fight. And both women threw everything that they had at each other with no remorse. And the very same teachers and nurses and farmers are taking their medical advice from memes on Facebook, and they are taking their political news from sites of conspiracies. Do you not think that as an influential personality that is heard from many people around the world, that maybe someone in your position should be guiding people toward better sources? Carrie burst into a sharp, sudden, soundless laugh. "Better sources? Do you mean like yours? Because heaven forbid that someone might see the same thing as you do, but make a different conclusion. Heaven forbid that someone has different priorities, different values, or different life experiences that shape their worldview. Some conclusions are fact and cannot be changed, Carrie. The Earth is round. Vaccines are responsible for saving countless lives. Climate change is a factual event. Those are not matters of opinion. And I've never stated otherwise. But you are angry with me for not spewing what you believe, Joy, and there's a massive difference between those two things." Whoopi was trying to intervene, desperately attempting to cut into a total train wreck. Ladies, I think we are all getting a little hot in the saddle. Perhaps we can—" "No, Whoopi," Carrie interrupted. "I want to finish what I'm saying because Joy implied that I had blood on my hands, and I think that that's something worth responding to." Carrie once again faced Joy. "I'm not saying I want you to do all the work. I'm not asking for you to compromise your beliefs, but I am asking if there's a possibility of bridging that gap. Do you think it makes us a better country when our teachers are taking their medical advice from social media outlets, or our farmers from a website they found from a pop-up ad online? It seems like to me this problem isn't one-sided. You called these people ignorant, but some of them aren't ignorant, they're afraid. And how do you think that you're making anyone feel more secure by continuing to demonize the people that support me? Because here's what I've learned by talking to the people that come to my concerts and buy my music. They have been told for years that they are the wrong kind of people, that they are bad people, that their voices don't matter, and they've been told all of those things by the media, by politicians, and by celebrities. So they tune into my music and they hear me defending them. They hear someone who has been attacked so many times and is telling them it's okay to speak up. Joy was left with her mouth wide open, literally unable to say a single word, and Carrie continued, "When they tune into your show every morning and they hear you, a supposed friend of the working class person, talking down to them, ridiculing their intelligence and dismissing their values, they are only confirming what they already suspected all along about who these coastal elite liberals are. If your goal was to win hearts and minds, then I have a newsflash. You have spectacularly failed. If your goal was to tear people further apart, well, congratulations." Joy finally regained her composure, but the fire in her belly was all but extinguished. So, is this the end for the Golden Girl of Daytime, or did she just deliver the most powerful speech of her career? Stick around, the drama after the commercial break is even more astounding. "I was not trying to attack anyone, Carrie," stammered Joy without her normal edge. "I was attempting to have a real and meaningful discussion about the role that celebrities play in our democracy. That was it." Carrie slowly shook her head, with sheer disappointment plastered all over her face. "No, Joy, you were not attempting to have a discussion. You were attempting to badger me into being your spokesperson, and since I did not play along with your games, you decided to attack myself and every single one of my fans. This is not honest. This is precisely why nobody trusts the media any longer." The weight of the moment settled on the studio like a dark cloud. This was no ordinary clip. It was a cultural shift. You could see the same shock on the faces of all the panelists. They all knew this was a clip that would be remembered forever and debated by countless people. The ensuing silence after the masterful takedown seemed to go on for an eternity. Joy Behar, who always knew how to get the last word in, sat there absolutely speechless. Her face looked like she had been caught in a storm and could not understand what was happening. The other panelists looked as though they were watching two planes collide in slow motion, could not turn their eyes away, and did not want to be any further from what they were witnessing. The veteran talk show host Whoopi Goldberg, the queen of the panel, finally found her voice, albeit it wavered, and then forced a laugh, attempting to ease the room with, "Well, I believe that we've certainly had an honest discussion here." But the damage was already done, and the air in the room was gone. Carrie remained seated with her hands folded in her lap and a fire burning in her eyes of someone who had just battled for her life and won. Sarah Haynes attempted to bring the segment back from its ashes by, "Carrie, perhaps we could talk about your tour dates and remind people what you are here for today." Carrie turned to Sarah with her head tilted in a way that only a leader can. "You know what, Sarah? I believe that we have addressed what needed to be addressed today, but I would like to say something to the people who are watching this." Carrie Underwood then leaned forward into the camera. The Golden Girl had vanished from sight. Now there was only a leader. "To everybody watching this at home and not at home alike, I want to be able to express that I believe in each and every one of you," she declared in a voice that would be described as unwavering. "I believe in your right to form your own opinions and to come to your own decisions about how best to govern and raise your families. There is absolutely no need for celebrities, politicians, or media personalities to tell you how you should believe. Each of you is intelligent enough to figure it out by yourselves." Joy shifted uncomfortably in her chair with a tight jaw, saying nothing. "And to my fans, I also respect you too much to ever presume that I have the answers. I will continue to make music for your hearts, and I will continue to leave it up to you to continue with your lives. There is absolutely no selfishness being exhibited here. There is respect." The studio seemed to be in shock for what felt like hours, until finally Alyssa Farah Griffin, who had been eerily quiet during the entire ordeal, spoke. Were they going to put the storm behind them, or would there be another blast to overcome? It was an intriguing last moment on a segment that was to wrap up, but would forever live in the cultural minds of America. "Carrie, what you said about respecting your audience. I thought that was one of the most important things I have heard." Alyssa Farah Griffin jumped in, her voice cutting through the tension. "We constantly talk down to people on politics and media and not with them." Joy's head snapped toward Alyssa, her eyes blazing with an entirely new fury against her own colleague's betrayal, but Alyssa wasn't fazed. I think there's a huge difference between using your platform responsibly and using it to pontificate at people. Perhaps we all need to take a deep breath and figure out which it is we are actually doing. The silence that followed was deafening. Joy Behar had arrived this morning with the assumption that she would expose Carrie Underwood for a coward hiding behind a veil of nonpartisanship, but she had been systematically eviscerated by someone she had severely underestimated, and now her own panel was spinning out of her control. Sunny Hostin attempted one last time to mediate the crisis. I do think we can all agree that these are complex issues, and people of good faith can have different ideas about how we solve them. Carrie wanted no such diplomacy. Can we, Sunny? Carrie's voice was sharp as a razor, because from where I stand, what I have heard today is that if I don't promote these particular political ideologies, I am somehow a party to murder and violence. That is not a different idea about how we solve things. That is character assassination. Joy finally had her voice back, but the fire was extinguished. The sound was hollow. I think you're making things a little overblown, Carrie. Am I? Carrie's response was a lightning strike. You have just accused me of having blood on my hands on national television in front of millions. I don't know what you call that if not dramatic, Joy. The audience started to murmur, a low hum buzzing around the studio. There was the Team Carrie contingent, of course, and the others who were simply stunned by the intensity of the argument. This was more than just good TV. This was raw, untamed reality. Knowing the segment had devolved past the point of any conceivable repair, Whoopi quickly intervened to shut down the pandemonium. Well, that certainly has been illuminating. Carrie, thank you for being here and sharing your thoughts with us. Whoopi, Carrie interjected, her hand raised slightly. Could I say just one more thing? Whoopi nodded slowly. Please. Carrie looked from each face at the table and then out to the millions of viewers at home. I came here today to discuss my music, my career, things I feel bring people joy. Carrie stated, her voice strong and clear. Instead, I have been attacked for not being political enough. But this right here, this is exactly why people feel alienated from the media and entertainment. She paused to let the gravity of the statement settle over the room. When we can't even have a conversation about music without it turning into a political interrogation, when we refuse to respect the choice of an artist to be an artist and not a political activist, when we leap to conclusions about people based on their home address and their musical preferences, then we are driving people apart, not bringing them together. Joy opened her mouth, ready to blast Carrie, but Carrie held up her hand again, a silent plea for calm, or rather, a declaration of her own unwavering conviction. I am not done, and I want everyone watching to understand something right now. This has nothing to do with left versus right. This has nothing to do with liberal versus conservative. Carrie's voice dropped to a whisper, which to the listeners felt like a shout. This has to do with respect. The screen was moments away from going dark, but the repercussions of this confrontation would soon be reverberating across the entire country. Is this the moment when the Golden Girl becomes the single most powerful voice in country music? Let us know what you think in the comments below, and please like and subscribe if you'd like more dissections of the most impactful moments in Hollywood history. It's about the understanding that in a free country, people have the right to make their own decisions. Who to worship, who to vote for, and yes, who to listen to, without being lectured or shamed into complicity with evil. The studio fell utterly silent, save for the hum of the equipment. Every person in the room understood that they hadn't merely watched a segment. They had just witnessed a defining cultural moment. Carrie stood gracefully and professionally. She offered her hand first to Whoopi, then shook the hand of each panelist. When she reached Joy, the air turned frigid. There was a palpable, terrifying pause before Joy begrudgingly reached out to meet Carrie's handshake. Thank you for having me, Carrie said, her voice pure class. I hope this was as eye-opening for everyone else as it was for me. She then turned to exit the studio, and the audience didn't just applaud, they exploded. Unlike the measured applause of a morning show segment, the room was a cacophony of both fervent, unadulterated cheers for the woman who had dared to take a stand, and the stunned, indignant fury of the viewers who had been subjected to what was, in their eyes, a liberal agenda being pushed to the extreme. Whoopi attempted to transition to commercial, but the air still buzzed with the raw energy of the confrontation. Joy, looking dazed, simply stared down at her notes and began to process the magnitude of what had just happened. All of the panelists exchanged knowing glances. There was no doubt in any of their minds that their respective careers would be forever colored by this moment. What had started as a typical promotional tour stop had morphed into a masterclass in failed discourse. In a twisted turn of events, it was the decidedly non-political country singer who was forced to educate a room of purportedly political news pundits. The View has, of course, weathered numerous storms over the years, but none that have been quite like this one. The disagreement wasn't about policy or political maneuvering. It was about fundamental respect and how we, as a nation, treat one another. When the studio lights finally dimmed and the cameras were cut, there was one clear, irrefutable truth that lingered. Carrie Underwood had walked into a lion's den and not only survived but thrived. In so doing, she managed to illustrate perhaps the most powerful political statement that any public figure could possibly make today: the absolute right to choose to not be a political pawn. It was a moment that will live in pop culture memory long after today's breaking news has been forgotten. But what about you? What are your thoughts on celebrities choosing to avoid politics? Do you feel they have a responsibility to use their platform for the greater good? Or do you fully respect their decision to maintain a distinction between their art and their political beliefs? Let me know in the comments section below, and let's keep this important discussion going. And while you're here, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe so you don't miss out on our future deep dives into the issues the mainstream media tends to conveniently skip. Thanks for watching.